faith and belief. In a dialogue like this, it seems to me very important to make a distinction between faith and belief. Every tradition is made up of these two aspects. And I've pondered these two words for many years, and I wrote a little book about them recently. Faith, it seems to me, is different from belief. And we can tell what it means just by the way we use the word in ordinary language. We speak about a faithful friend, or being faithful in your marriage, or being faithful to a promise that you've made. And when we make those kind of commitments or promises, we may do so in a moment of enthusiasm or a moment of romance, and then later circumstances change, difficulties are faced, and that first commitment is tested. Circumstances are very difficult. You feel like giving up and running away. And if you can, you remain faithful to that commitment, faithful to that promise. You're constantly being tested about it. You're constantly being asked to recommit yourself to it and to make sure that it was the right commitment. But this is what we mean by faith. So faith is an innate human capacity for relationship and for commitment, and therefore for self-transcendence. That means the transcendence of our ego. The ego always wants an easy life. The ego always wants to be romantically in love, or always to have its desires fulfilled. It always wants to be well thought of and to be well respected and to be applauded. So when the ego doesn't get what it wants, it looks for some other way of getting it. So we have to transcend the ego in order to grow in faith. But if you look at your life, at any stage in your life, the quality and the depth and the authenticity of your life will depend upon the level of your faith. How faithful have you learned to be to the deepest promises and commitments that your life has led you into? How faithful are you? We're all aware of times of infidelity, times where we feel we've broken a promise or we've let somebody down, and then we have to be healed, we have to be forgiven, we have to start again. That's an essential aspect of life. I'm not speaking about perfectionism, but I'm speaking about fidelity. A fidelity that allows us to become more and more deeply integrated as human beings. Because every act of faith we make deepens our integration. It is what makes us a more whole person. And by the end of our lives, we will evaluate our lives as we lie on our deathbed, if we get that chance. We will evaluate our lives, I think, by the measure of faith that we have lived by. And the most obvious aspect of that will be love. I have a friend, doctor, who's worked for many years with dying patients in palliative care, in hospice movement. And he says in 30 years, he has never met anybody on their deathbed who said to him, "Doctor, I wish I had spent more time at the office." But there are many people on their deathbed who will say, "I wish I had spent more time with this person or with my family, or I wish I had stretched out my hand to reconcile with my brother or my sister or my mother or my father." And is there a chance of doing that even now, sometimes, at this last moment? So this is, I think, the measure of a good human life, how faithfully we have lived and how that faith expresses itself in love. There's an expression in St. Paul where he speaks about faith growing and faith becoming active in love. So faith is really, you could say, our capacity for love. You cannot love without enduring, without extending that commitment we make to another person or to a promise through time, good times and bad times. We see this, for example, in the practice of meditation itself. People often begin to meditate with a certain enthusiasm, a certain gung-ho attitude. You know, meditation seems easy, and sometimes you get some good experiences at the beginning of the practice, and then it's more difficult. And most people, myself included when I began, give up. You give up after a few weeks, or a few days, or a few months, and you may give up for a short time, or you may give up for a long time. Something may bring you back to it. Maybe a friend who's meditating, maybe your relationship with a community. So you can start again. But meditation itself is a way of faith. Not only as a daily practice that becomes more and more integrated into your ordinary life, but even in the time of meditation itself, you are, as it were, exercising the muscle of faith through this act of pure attention that I described in the way that we meditate, the specific form I was describing. But in every form of meditation, we are faithful to an act of attention. We're faithful during that half hour to the stillness, to the silence, to the simplicity, and to the particular discipline of attention. We may not feel that we've done it perfectly, but we've done it. We've been faithful to it. And we find the fruits of that practice appearing in our life, in our relationships, in daily life. So meditation is a way of faith. We practice that way of faith probably within a particular religious tradition. That religious tradition may teach certain different forms of meditation, although they have many similarities. But certainly, those different religious traditions will also have different belief systems, will describe what is happening. They will describe what is at the center of the wheel in different terms. So we have a belief system attached to or linked to a way of faith. And some people might say, well, we don't really need the belief system then. But it seems to me that a belief system is an important aid, a necessary aid for the vast majority of people. That we need beliefs which express our values, that are inspirational symbols, that give us insights beyond our ordinary rational understanding into the meaning of our life experience and what we're doing on this way of faith. We also learn certain basic moral precepts from this belief system, which we need to practice in order to maintain our balance. So, the belief system is a valuable and a sacred aspect of our human journey as well. And I think if you have no belief system, and in the modern world there are many people who will say, I have no religion, I'm not religious, I don't believe in anything, but I'm spiritual. Well, that's possible. But also, there are many people who are in that position who find themselves in a crisis, they find themselves spiritually orphaned, unsupported, and I think very often exposed to false kinds of spirituality. None of our religious institutions are perfect. Whether it's a church or a mosque or a temple or a synagogue or wherever, as institutions they are imperfect. Nevertheless, for all its imperfections, our religious belief systems and the institutions that teach them and allow us to be formed by them, I think are an important and necessary vehicle for our way of faith. But this distinction between faith and belief, I think, is a vital one for us to, I find it very vital anyway, to reflect on in an era of dialogue that we have entered. And it is possible, I think, when you see that distinction between faith and belief, to say that we can create a global community of faith from people of different beliefs. So we can be in a community of faith even though we believe very differently. The important thing about a tradition is that it is always being renewed. It is never fixed. It's never frozen. Religious people can sometimes be quite conservative when it comes to their religious forms and institutions and traditions and rituals, and some level of continuity, some predictability and connection with the past, I think, is a real aspect of tradition too. Nevertheless, we have to be constantly adapting. And it's our contemplative dimension of faith that allows our religious institutions and our religious belief systems to be updated frequently. And because change is so rapid today, we need that updating more and more regularly. Often you turn on your computer, Microsoft or Mac interrupt you and say, we're now updating your system. You have to wait for something to be installed. Well, in the same way, I think our religious traditions need this regular infusion of an updating to the contemporary world. But it's the same tradition that is being renewed. Without this contemplative dimension, we might be frightened of that updating. We might be frightened of that adaptation to the contemporary world. But if that happens, then our religions become irrelevant, or they become museum pieces. They become just ceremonial escape. They become Disney worlds, rather than places that are truly nurturing the human journey into wholeness.